Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm happy to speak on the government's continued legislative response to the Samuel report. That report of the review into the Commonwealth EPPC Act was delivered to government in October 2020. The Coalition failed to respond to that report and failed to act. Their opposition to this legislation is simply a continuation of that failure. In contrast, the Albanese government has taken to the task. This is the second tranche of reforms following the review, with a third to follow. In the foreword to the report, Professor Graham Samuel stated, Australia's natural environment and iconic places are in an overall state of decline and are under increasing threat. They are not sufficiently resilient to withstand current, emerging or future threats, including climate change. And in my electorate of Hasluck, this has been absolutely evident this season. So for the past, until just this crossover between autumn and winter, Western Australia had experienced a drought, and we have seen a forest collapse of the Northern Jarrah. And to have this happen where no matter how many kilometres you drive, you witness the loss of this stunning, beautiful habitat that supports an enormous ecosystem, from bird life of our black cockatoos through to obviously insects and other flora and fauna. It is absolutely, utterly devastating, and everyone across the community is pointing it out and talking about it. It happened once before in 2011, and it was then deemed the first in the world event, and now we've seen it again in 2024. So this is real, and we have a responsibility to respond. And some of the way in which we respond is a little dry and technical, but it's necessary in order to create the framework to achieve action that's lasting. And to this end, Samuel said that the EPPC Act is outdated and requires fundamental reform. Importantly, he stressed that because the environmental law required fundamental reform, it would need to be done in a sensible and a staged pathway to achieve it. So this second stage of legislation establishes two pivotal bodies, each of them with necessary independence from the government of the day and, importantly, independent from one another. We are building the house in which the final stage of the reforms will find its home. Environment Information Australia will inform the application of the new environmental law, and Environment Protection Australia, an independent EPA with teeth, will administer it. The ALP's national platform states that Labor believes in a strong national environmental protection framework, commits the party to pursue a strong and independent EPA and publicly available and transparent environmental data. So I wish to speak first to the Environment Information Australia. I think it is generally underestimated, the body that we are creating here. It's a great positive change vehicle. The EIA will make a difference to environmental outcomes in two particular ways. It will become, over time, the fundamental national repository of up-to-date and historical information about our environment. And importantly, it will be an ongoing, respected, independent voice that will, without fear or favour, tell the community and each successive government, regardless of their propensity to listen to it, just how we are going in the protection of the environment. The Samuel Report and Recommendation 10 emphasises the vital importance of improving the information base of our environmental protection system. The legislation embodies that attitude, and through the statutory position of the Head of Environment Information Australia, it will ensure the establishment of and the ongoing integrity of accurate, timely, regular and useful environmental reporting for the country as a whole. The head of the EIA, while situated within the department, will not be subject to direction by the Secretary of the Department, the Minister or any other person in the fulfilment of their statutory duties in relation to the monitoring, evaluation or the reporting, including the state of the environment reports and the environmental economic accounts. There will be a public environmental portal created and maintained by the EIA, and this works both ways. An example from the UK is the government-supported Environmental Information Data Centre, which carries as menu headings on its website: firstly, find data, and secondly, deposit data. And who will deposit the data for the EIA? state governments, university researchers, and of course the many grassroots organisations and peak bodies that work in their own fields or regions every day. And by example, just with this forest collapse, we were called upon as community scientific citizens is to photograph and capture the GPS data of where these tree collapses occurred, and we've all uploaded that into a particular data point within the university, which in due course we'll now be able to share into this national platform. And there are many other groups with memberships across Hasluck that I know will make the most of this new opportunity, such as Regeneration, the Darling Range ACF community, local chapters of the Citizens Climate Lobby, the Climate Action Network Australia. We've got Guildford in Transition, the Darling Range Wildlife, Save Perth Hills, the industrious catchment groups of Jane Brook, Susanna Brook, Blackadder Woodbridge and the Lower Helena Valley, the Swan Valley Wildlife and Environment Advocacy Group and the Perth Hills Climate Change Interest Groups, to name just a few. Collectively, they see what's happening on the ground. They notice the change. They can understand when we've got fuel loads, when the soil is becoming dry. They can see the changes that as a consequence of a drying climate, particularly in Perth and across the hills. Their data is valuable, but now we can extract the value from their efforts and use that data in a meaningful way. So I expect the EIA will also find helpful synergies with other major repositories, such as Geoscience recently launched Digital Atlas of Australia, so we can start to join the dots around the nation. And further, this legislation places positive duties upon the Environment Minister to respond to the State of the Environment reports in a timely way and to table annual statements of the environmental economic accounts. It's good legislation and an essential part of underpinning the new environmental legislation, the efficacy of the EPA. The budget sees an allocation of $54 million over the 4 years to establish the EIA, and the legislation requires the Minister to conduct 5-yearly reviews too. An article in the Conversation this month by Professor Hugh Possingham and others agreed that the EIA was needed, but suggested that by itself it won't improve outcomes for nature. And while I certainly understand the intent of the comment, I actually disagree. I think that this body will have an effect all on its own, both through the more comprehensive and available information it will provide and through the spotlight its reporting regime will throw upon the environmental needs, outcomes and responses. The data that will be collected will include data not just on native species, but also on invasive species, both flora and fauna. In relation to feral cats, which kill about 6 million native animals every day, this government is developing a new action plan, and state and local governments across the country will have then the data to share. Action to remove feral cats from islands such as Christmas Island and other protective areas have been shown to be an effective way to save animals in place and avoid extinctions. Federal government leadership in this area is important so that the experience and success of the state and the local efforts can be shared and replicated. The Feral Cat Abatement Plan consultation late last year received over 1,600 responses, and the new draft is being created by the department presently. So I'm pleased to support the establishment of the EIA. Once it is in place, it will mean, as the Minister said, that no future government will be able to hide information about the state of the environment, as the previous coalition did. The other bill before us is to establish the Commonwealth EPA, the Environment Protection Australia, and will have strong new powers and penalties and will be independent. Almost every state and territory in Australia has an EPA, almost. Perhaps Queensland will take the hint after this bill passes. The USA has an EPA, Canada has its Environmental and Climate Change Agency, the UK has its Environment Agency, Germany has the Umweltbundesamt, or the UBA. In order to show that we are serious as a parliament about environmental protection, we need to create a powerful authority to embody that intention, and we need to fund it. The budget provides $121 million to establish the EPA, which will act across a wide range of legislative powers and activities, including the natural environment, recycling, waste exports, hazardous waste, sea dumping, ozone protection, cultural heritage, air and water quality, offset appropriateness and delivery, amongst many other things. The EPA will be an independent statutory agency. The CEO will not be subject to direction by the Minister or the Secretary of the Department or anyone else. Public statements of intent will frame the relationship between the EPA and the Minister of the day. This new agency will have formidable powers and penalties. Courts will be able to impose fines of up to $780 million or send people to prison for up to 7 years for extremely serious intentional breaches of federal environmental law. The EPA has significant separation in the regulation of our environmental approvals and will underpin the delivery of the new environmental laws that will come before the Parliament next. So it does appear, though, that some members opposite are uneasy about the proposals to legislate an EPA and an Environment Information Body. The member for Page wants to pretend that this good environmental law is the city people telling the country people what to do. He says we will quash investment, but this government is the one creating an attractive investment environment. It's those opposite who are trying to wreck it with their nuclear fantasies. The Clean Energy Council welcomes the introduction of these bills. The member for Mallee complained that the government seemed to want to insert consideration for the climate into every area of policy. Well, that's right. I put it to the members for Mallee and Page, and perhaps the National Party as a whole needs to hear this, that if you aren't willing to put climate-related considerations into every area of policy, then you simply do not understand the nature and the extent of the climate emergency. Fortunately, most voters do seem to carry that understanding, and I don't just mean city voters. I mean most voters in Mallee and Page too. The members might need to catch up with their constituents. People in rural areas understand the issues that climate change and environmental degradation carry. Let the member of Mallee go and ask Yarlinks Landcare up at Warracknabel or Scouter Group at Horsham what they think about the new environmental laws. Let the member for Page seek the views of the Coffs Coast Climate Action Group or the Lismore Environmental Group. Come back next sitting and let us know what those people think, and others working at the coalface of environmental issues in your electorates think about this legislation for the federal EPA and the Environmental Information Australia. The member for Mallee also stated that the independence of the two bodies enshrined in legislation was an issue. We are proud to create these independent bodies with teeth. They will no doubt provide challenges for Labor Environment ministers, and I can tell the members that Minister Plibersek is up to the challenge. I can understand if the challenge of that independence will be too much for some coalition members who would rather not have to take significant action on the environment, but they may just need to adjust to this new reality. The coalition seem to be saying that Labor is doing too much with this legislation to assist the environment. On the other hand, the Greens have come in and pretend that they don't support the legislation by speaking about anything but the legislation. The member for Brisbane said the legislation is a cynical distraction. The truth, as usual, is neither of these things. The coalition can't support the legislation because they don't have the imagination to realise how necessary it is. The Greens will support the legislation but can't say they will because they are terrified of being irrelevant to the real and deliberate action Labor is taking to fix our environmental laws. I commend Minister Plibersek for her carriage of this legislation and her dedication to seeing all of these laws, our response to the Samuel report, through to completion, and I support these bills.